Well, my own involvement, it came at a perfect time for me. You talk about young, I was 32, and I had decided that with 2 young children at home, and then I decided the next thing that I did that I really liked, I was going to stick with it. I was doing a lot of volunteer work. And it just so happened I was invited to this conference and thoroughly enjoyed the mission. You would find that the people were generalist. They were not tooting their own horn, and they wanted to work together for the common good. You know, it's interesting, people from time to time have said to me, how did you get on the Kellogg Foundation board? At the same time, you were CEO of the Council of Michigan Foundations. Well, it's rather an interesting story and an interesting balance. I met Russ Mobby, who was CEO at the 1972 conference of the Conference of Michigan Foundations. And then I served for a couple of years with him on the board, so I would see him sporadically. And he was always interested in what you were doing and what boards you served on and what was being accomplished. So that was interesting. Then I assumed the staff role at the Council of Michigan Foundations, and I would see him much more frequently as we worked on common interest and common projects. Well, he took me to lunch a couple of times and talked about a whole wide range of issues, whether it was corporations, family values, politics, and I found that very interesting. I, in my job, had many meetings with donors and CEOs and listened attentively. Then one day, he said to me, Dottie, the Kellogg Foundation board is currently all men. We need to diversify this board, and I'm going to start with a woman. Would you please propose some women? Would you help me with this? So I remember coming home that night and saying to my husband, you'll never know what I get to do now. And that is to propose some women candidates for the Kellogg Foundation board. And I told him, I said, oh, I would love to do that. I know I could do it, but I'll never stand a chance. So I went to work on the project. And I think I had 8 serious candidates. We had set a meeting for 3 weeks later. And I went to the Kellogg Foundation and sat down, and we talked about various and sundry issues and got to the subject at hand. And he said to me, quote, what about you? And I said, you got a deal. It's interesting when I think about my time at the Council of Michigan Foundations, I go really to the first conference, which was held in Ann Arbor, and I was like a deer in the headlights with all of this. All I had done was serve on a community foundation board and individual nonprofit boards. And then I was sitting there between Stanley Kresge and Harding Mott. And one time when I was on the steering committee, we had a Native American gentleman that suddenly realized his flight was 2 hours earlier than he had expected. Harding Mott literally throws me his car keys and says, get him to the airport. Well, Harding had a Cadillac convertible, white, I'll never forget it. I am flying down 94, that was kind of fun. And Stanley Kresge, at the same time, his wife's name was Dorothy, as mine is, and he liked that, and he kept repeating that. And we were talking about Thanksgiving, and I said to him, oh, he was telling me all the family that were coming, and I said, oh, I'm sure that Dorothy, your wife, has some help. And his response was, well, she has a dishwasher. That was kind of fun. Dick Thrun and I'll Get Cracking, I'll never forget it. And I have worn a lot of hats. And the grantees that I've worked with, I will never forget their stories and what has been accomplished, the children that have been helped, the vulnerable children that have been helped. I think of the mothers, single moms, raising children, working a job, and trying to do the very best for their children. Have I been in tears over the years? Yes. You know, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many fine people who've been mentors and examples. But personally, I grew up in California. I had two very smart, hardworking parents. My mother, later in life, went into real estate. My dad worked for Paramount Motion Picture Studios. He was head of the scenic department. But I grew up in the era where if you worked hard, whatever you were doing, whatever you wanted to be, you could accomplish it. And what a gift to be in Southern California at that time. Went to Berkeley. I was vice president of the student body at that time. I always wanted to help. I was in student government all through everything. From there, attended the Harvard Radcliffe program in business at the Harvard Business School. The last class, I'm dating myself, women were admitted directly the following year, same classes, same courses, professors, as the students across the river had had. I met my husband at that time, and who was at the Harvard Business School. We were married, went to New York City, worked for J. Walter Thompson in advertising. There were 12 men and me. I know I was an afterthought, but I took it. But even then in New York, I was volunteering. I volunteered at the Lighthouse, which was reading to the blind, and really was a very passionate and compassionate concern. Eventually ended up in Grand Haven, Michigan, and really at 25, threw myself into the volunteer circuit. And I was involved with the United Way and the Arts Council and our church, many different things. You know, one thing I should share, when I think about my philanthropic story and ethic, I don't know if it's in the genes or what, but both my grandfathers were ministers, although I never knew either one of them. They were deceased by the time I was born. And there was always the importance of giving back. So I just sort of grew up with it. It was very natural. You know, I grew up in a middle-class USA family, and my parents were certainly philanthropic. My mother donated her time for the community chest, which ultimately became the United Way. She was very involved with the PTAs and things that would help her children. We were just a typical middle-class family, and with all the promise and excitement about what would happen. I never met, at that point, any big fancy donors. It was just a matter of doing good with what you had. My first philanthropic experience was in the 3rd grade when we all brought 10 cents to buy a harmonica in Mrs. Jones' class. And I'll never forget it because I knew one of the girls in the class, family, 10 cents was too much. So I suggested to 10 of my friends that we each bring 11 cents. I didn't know it at the time, but I guess that was my first fundraising effort. But anyway, with my career, I was very blessed. As far as the Council of Michigan Foundations, the conference, I got that invitation at a time when I was on probably 6 different boards. And I told myself, the next time that something that you're really interested in comes up, focus on that and see it through. It's not all going to be peaches and cream, but see it through. Well, I'm still in it all these years later. You know, it's interesting. I married a very philanthropic man. I didn't know it at the time. We'd known each other 5 months when we were engaged. But we have a joint value of ethic and service. We've both been on many different nonprofit boards. And that is carried on with our children. We have 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren who are continually asking what we're doing. They want to help others. Sometimes I think it's in the food we eat, or the gene pool, or it's an ethic. And that's why we started Learning to Give, which was to have others be exposed to that. Today there are some wealthy people on the Forbes 400 list who never have, and it's all new to them, and their motivations for giving can be very different. I was blessed beyond blessed with career opportunities, meeting the right people at the right time, people who opened doors, And yes, I served, but it was a team effort all along the way. Well, I had a opportunistic career because not only did it involve the whole nonprofit sector, having served on the boards of the Council on Foundations and Independent Sector and the Foundation Center and the Better Business Bureau and the National Center on Family Philanthropy. The list is endless. But again, it was what we had in Michigan that I was able to bring to the table, and that was all extremely valuable. And forever, I will be grateful for the people that I met and the opportunities and the doors that were opened, because while you're very thoughtful to ask me this as a personal reflection, it's the good that ultimately came out of it that I'm the most proud of. You asked me what attracted me to philanthropy, and I guess when I think about it, my mother told me I wanted to please. Maybe that's true. But I've always wanted to help other people within the means that I had. I was raised in a culture of giving back. I married a man that felt the same way. And philanthropy includes working with all sectors of society, and that's an interest I have. I get ideas from all people, whether it's the parking attendant or the man that owns the hotel. And frankly, I like to be part of people and places and things to get things done.